From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The New Hampshire primary beckons this week as Tuesday approaches, and Ron DeSantis, 2 days before the primary, ends his presidential campaign and endorses Donald Trump. What went wrong with the Florida governor's campaign, and can Nikki Haley now take advantage, given that it's a two-person race between her and Donald Trump? Plus, Dean Phillips is trying to shock the Democratic Party and maybe the world with a strong showing against President Biden in New Hampshire. How well does he have to do to make such an impression? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal, and I'm here with Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel, both colleagues of mine at the opinion pages. Let's start today with Ron DeSantis conceding defeat. Even before the first primary election, he had invested an enormous amount of money and time in Iowa, but finished a distant third. His campaign began with so much promise. In fact, there was a time when he was actually leading not too long after his great re-election victory in Florida in 2022, and much touted as a candidate, but it never really came together for DeSantis. Trump got in early in the race, early in 2023, and began to make DeSantis his main target. DeSantis didn't fight back because he said he was governing and didn't get in until, I think, June, was it, in the race? Kim, the press is focused on his delay in launching the campaign, his botched entry with that Twitter entry into the race, and disagreements, infighting in the campaign. But my view about these presidential races is that the two most important things are the candidate and the message. And as for the candidate, Ron DeSantis just isn't what I would describe as a winsome political personality. He's a grinder, which has its virtues when you're in office, getting things done, getting bridges built. But on the campaign trail, not Mr. Sunshine.
Oh, Paul, focusing on the candidate and the message when we could just talking about technical flaws in his campaign. No, you're absolutely right. Look, he had as good a shot as any in this race. And as you say, not the most winsome political character. It took him a long time. I would say most of the entirety of the time he was on the trail to learn how to smile, to learn how to give a little joke, to be a little warmer toward people. I think he also took too long to, as it were, extrapolate what he had done in Florida to a national message, to explain, here's what I did there, and here's how it's going to change your life on a national stage from a federal level. Obviously, everybody wants to see competence, and that is what governors do when they run in races, is they say, look how well I did for my state. But you have to be able to translate that into something that Americans can then connect to their life out there in the bigger republic. So I think that there was that problem, and also just didn't draw enough distinctions with Donald Trump. That was his fundamental flaw, the flaw in the messaging part, which is that he was sort of MAGA light. He wanted to suggest to voters out there, well, if you like everything else Donald Trump did, but you are a little concerned about his character or his unpredictability, go with me. And what he discovered is that if you're a real Trump supporter, there isn't really any replacement for the real deal. And so he couldn't pull people over to his side in the end.
Yeah, if you like grape nuts, you're going to buy the grape nuts. You're not going for the substitute. I agree with Kim's analysis here, Kyle. I don't know whether you do, but I think that he never really gave people enough of a reason to split from Trump. Competence alone, kind of Trumpism with competence, wasn't doing it. And he never really took the gloves off against Trump. And in contrast to Trump sure taking the gloves off on DeSantis, accusing him of disloyalty and all kinds of other sins.
All that's true. I think what I would add is that he often seemed to be narrow casting to a specific vision of conservative niche voters. And that's why I would go back to this launch of his campaign on this Twitter Spaces event with Elon Musk. And I agree that there was some overhype about what that showed in terms of the glitches of the campaign launch and the technical matter of whether this is the right way to do it. What I think it does show, though, is how hyper-focused he was on narrow casting to groups of conservative voters, launching his campaign on the internet, talking to Elon Musk about cryptocurrency instead of the kind of traditional set piece speech where you go to the Reagan Library and you stand in front of Air Force One there and it's surrounded by a bunch of flags and you present yourself as a happy warrior and give a vision of what you've done in Florida and what you can do for the United States. And I think that sort of mentality that this was the approach to win carried through his campaign. And it was notable in recent days. Ron DeSantis was speaking to an interviewer and acknowledged that it was a mistake not to do more traditional mainstream media shows, not to get on those broadcast shows and talk to all voters, including some Trump supporters who may tuned in, but also independents, moderates, centrists who can vote in a lot of these Republican primaries and caucuses. And Ron DeSantis was not really spending a lot of time speaking to them.
Well, of course, you have to have a message when you speak, wherever venue you're on. And I agree with you, Kyle. He should have had a much broader media strategy. But he was trying to put together, I think it's an interesting observation, narrow casting, building this group. Okay, here's the evangelical abortion community. We'll give them a 6-week abortion ban. Here's the people who don't like woke. I'll go after Disney. Here's the people who don't like unions. Well, we're going to pass this union anti-card check bill and essentially trying to make it harder for unions to dominate individual workers in Florida. Very good policy, but the parts didn't add up to something larger, Kim, a reason to fire Trump.
No, that's absolutely right. And, you can add a few more things to that as well, too. Parents, you're unhappy about your kids' education. Here's this bill that we're doing and expansive efforts we're making to expand school choice. And here's what we're doing at universities to crack down on woke university professors. So as you say, all these little pieces, but what's the bigger vision? And I think that there was some confusion in the end, too, about that vision, because at times, let's be clear, DeSantis simply looked undecided and weak. We've mentioned it several times. I'm standing on the stage looking up and down to see how else other people were going to raise their hand or not. And I think what you're describing here, Paul, is something that can happen to a lot of candidates when they move from being a big star in their state to prime time. They get surrounded by lots of consultants and people that try to micromanage their campaign, exactly as you say. They poll test their statements and their words. And it did feel as though DeSantis was being managed by this troop of people. I wrote a column a long time ago saying, free Ron DeSantis, just go out there and be the person you were in Florida, where he was clearly the leader. It felt like he was being managed up there on the stage. One other big thing that I think hurt him too, and that was clearly came out of this poll-driven approach, was abandoning what had been his prior beliefs when he was in Congress about a kind of strong national defense and chasing over those Trump voters, this sort of nascent America first, let's not spend any money overseas, slightly isolationist view. There's certainly Trump voters out there that feel that way, but there's a lot more Republican voters who still believe in peace through strength. And I think some of those decisions, again, which I believe were poll driven, really hurt him in the end.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, a little more on Ron DeSantis' decision to bail out of his campaign and who that might help in the primary, and Nikki Haley versus Donald Trump when we get back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel. And let's finish up with Ron DeSantis' decision to drop out of the presidential race, but not before endorsing Donald Trump and taking a shot at Nikki Haley as a warmed-over corporatist, as he put it. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it's kind of typical of DeSantis in a way, taking a narrow shot at somebody. The endorsement of Trump, in my mind, Kyle, he's trying to get back in the good graces of MAGA. Trump is already praising him as a wonderful human being. And if he helps him defeat Haley, I guess DeSantis is trying to keep his options open for 2028.
2028, and even more in the short term, because he's still the governor of the state of Florida, and he knows that most Republicans in the state of Florida are probably going to vote for President Trump in the primary, or they hope to in the general election. And so I agree, it is an attempt by not only DeSantis, but a lot of other Republicans who have been skeptical or critical of Trump to get back on Trump's good side before we get to a stage where Trump is the prohibitive favorite and there's no quote unquote risk, I guess you could say, being taken in re-endorsing Trump. I do think I agree with the elbow at Nikki Haley is unfortunate and shows the kind of thing that I think that's emblematic of why DeSantis struggled to rise above these back and forths. We thought it was notable. Nikki Haley's response to the dropout was just the opposite. Here's what she said: Ron DeSantis has been a good governor and I wish him well. And I think that is part of what is attracting people to Nikki Haley, this idea that she has a broader, more elevated message, that she's someone who is a happy warrior. As for the question about how much this will help Haley, it is interesting because there are polls that show more of Ron DeSantis' supporters. Their second choice is Donald Trump than Nikki Haley. So there was one from the University of New Hampshire and CNN that was released Sunday morning. 62% of DeSantis supporters prefer Trump as a second choice, only 30% Haley. What I think that misses, though, is just the role that Ron DeSantis has played in the last several weeks of this campaign of dogging Nikki Haley, constantly going after her and attacking her as a corporatist. That debate that they had in Iowa, where it was just the two of them on stage hammering each other. And so despite these polls, I do wonder if his dropping out is a boost to Haley in that it really gives her an opportunity to say, now we have a direct one-on-one choice for Republican voters. Do you want Donald Trump or do you want me? And maybe there's an incentive for her to stay in, even if she does not perform all that well in New Hampshire or South Carolina, to rack up some delegates in case something happens to Trump with these trials or with his health before we get to the Republican convention.
Kyle Peterson already seeing past New Hampshire to the convention. We're going to listen to Donald Trump, what he's been saying about Nikki Haley.
Nikki Haley, I know her well. The guy screaming bird brain. Only in New Hampshire does that happen. But she's made an unholy alliance with the rhinos, the never-Trumpers, Americans for no prosperity, globalists, the radical left communists, and they want to get liberals and Biden supporters. That's what they want. And, you have a governor here that allows Democrats to vote in the Republican primary. What's that all about? Your governor, and, he'll be coming. And he'll be calling me after the election. Sir, I just want to congratulate you very much.
The condominium between Nikki Haley and the radical left communists is something I hadn't heard before. I guess it's the common turn. She's is something else. And then also attacking Chris Sununu for allowing Democrats to vote in the primaries. Actually, independents can vote. Democrats, mostly those folks, will vote in the Democratic primary. If you're registered as a Democrat, I believe, Kim, you have to vote as a Democrat, right? Unless you change your registration.
Correct.
But also, that's a state law, right?
Yes.
This isn't something Chris Sununu said, oh, you know what? I think I'll just dictate that. So it's typical Trump. But let's listen to Haley, what she's been saying about Trump on the stump.
If you look recently, there have been multiple things. I mean, he claimed that Joe Biden was going to get us into World War II. I'm assuming he meant World War III. He said that he ran against President Obama. He never ran against President Obama. He says that I'm the one that kept security from the Capitol on January 6th. I was nowhere near the Capitol on January 6th. He's just not at the same level he was at 2016. I think we're seeing some of that decline. But more than that, what I'll say is focus on the fact that no matter what it is, chaos follows him. We saw this over and over again. It's not just that. He congratulated China's President Xi a dozen times after China gave us COVID. He congratulated the Chinese Communist Party on their 70th anniversary. We don't congratulate the Communist Chinese Party. I remember at the United Nations, I had to sit him down and tell him to stop this bromance with Putin. I mean, you can't have someone who's trying to buddy up with dictators that want to kill us. Instead, you have to let them know what we expect of them.
Kim, sharper criticism of Trump by Haley, particularly the mental side of things. Is it going to be enough?
Well, he did give her a little bit of an opening with this, too, because the reason she was attacking him on his mental fitness is that he gave a speech and he mixed her up with Nancy Pelosi. He has long complained that Nancy Pelosi denied the Capitol security that the White House had wanted during the January 6th event. And he was on that rant, but substituted Nikki Haley's name for Nancy Pelosi. And by the way, didn't do it just once, but twice. And that was the part that that really made it seem as though he wasn't all there. So she has jumped on that, and she's going in a couple of other ways too. Obviously, the attack that he is coddling strongmen. This has long been a concern. She has some real credibility when she talks about that too, because she was the UN ambassador, very involved in Trump foreign policy. And then we've seen a continuation of her doing what she had started already in Iowa, which is lumping Donald Trump and Joe Biden together. I saw her on another attempt then say, what do they have in common? They're both in investigations. They're both distractions. They're both mad. They both have hurt feelings, and they haven't shown an ounce of vision. Talking a little bit too about their relative ages. She at some point on the trail said, do we really want two 80-year-olds? So yes, much sharper. Is it too late? I think that's an interesting question. She's got a lot of work to do between today and tomorrow when people are going to come out. But these are the beginnings of the contrasts and the criticisms she should have been making, in my mind, since the beginning of the year. I think the one piece that's still lacking a bit is her own vision for the future, something more concrete than simply, I'll be Trump without the baggage. And we haven't seen that yet, I don't think.
Generational change, and then what, right? Generational change sounds good, I think, to a lot of voters, but then, okay, to what end? And she hasn't really answered that question with a great deal of specificity. The mental point, though, is interesting because it does sharpen the argument about generational change and the 280-year-olds. And look, I mean, I think we all have had parents who we've seen are not as sharp. Well, you guys are both too young, but I'm not. I've seen parents, not my dad, he died as a young man, but my mother later in life just wasn't as sharp as she was. We know peers, we know friends, we know mentors for whom that is true as they get up into their late 70s and early 80s, and they weren't presidents of the United States. They didn't have to deal with vigorous younger leaders who wish us ill. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. But Kyle, obviously, she's got to bring in a lot of independents to do well in this campaign. The polls, with one exception, the American Research Group has it really close, but most of the rest give Trump still a 10-point or more advantage.
Yeah, turnout's going to be huge. This point about the age, Trump being 77 and Biden being 81, this is the reason that all of those polls show that voters writ large want another option. Here's the Harvard-Harris poll from December. Do you think if Joe Biden and Donald Trump are the nominees of their parties, that the country needs another alternative? 63% say yes, or that this is a good choice for the voters. 37% say yes. And I've gotten a couple letters from listeners who say that can't be right. If the public doesn't want a Trump-Biden rematch, then we won't get one. But the key is thinking about who turns out for these caucuses and these party primaries. And in Iowa, it was about 15% now. We have the final figures of registered Republicans who participated in that caucus. And Iowa, similar to New Hampshire, there are more voters who are registered as no party, unaffiliated, than there are with either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And so that is going to be key. That is the difference here in New Hampshire, is that those unaffiliated voters, who are about 40% of New Hampshire registered voters as of the last data, those people can participate in the Republican primary. And one more thing that I would add on this point about Trump's claim about Democrats participating, the deadline to re-register as unaffiliated or as a Republican was back in October of 2023. And reportedly, there were about 4,000 people who re-registered as of that deadline. And so the question is not New Hampshire Democrats participating in this. It's these 343,000 people who are registered as undeclared, and they can vote in that Republican primary. And the question is, what do they do and how many of them turn out to the polls?